One thing you hear me say a lot on this show is that abortion is health care. It is needed and used safely and routinely in both emergency and non-emergency situations to preserve the health, lives, and livelihoods of women. And we've seen what happens when it's banned. Forced birth is dangerous. It's even deadly for women. But there's another less talked about consequence of post-Roe America, and that is the criminalization of pregnant women, all pregnant women. In much the same way that we've seen all manner of pregnant, miscarrying, and postpartum women suffer dangerous health consequences at the hands of indiscriminate and cruel abortion bans, the legal consequences of criminalizing abortion are broad as well. You can't criminalize women's health care without criminalizing women. And we're starting to see what that looks like. A disturbing new report reveals that criminal prosecutions targeting pregnant women for their conduct during pregnancy surged to a record high in the year following the Supreme Court's Dobbs ruling, which overturned Roe v. Wade. Between June 2022 and June 2023, more than 200 pregnant people faced charges, marking the highest number of such cases ever recorded in a single year, going back to 1973. According to a report by the reproductive rights nonprofit organization Pregnancy Justice. This is not just women being prosecuted for abortion. This is women being charged for behavior that is seen as endangering a pregnancy. The report links the rise in pregnancy-related criminalization to the radical legal doctrine of fetal personhood, a central objective of the anti-abortion movement and most abortion bans. Fetal personhood extends the legal definition of person to fetuses or even embryos, including in the context of the 14th Amendment, which grants equal protection under the law. And once legal rights are granted to a fetus, legal scrutiny can extend far beyond anti-abortion laws, enabling the surveillance of pregnant women's behavior from the moment of conception. This has an impact not only on those seeking abortions, but also women undergoing IVF, women who are experiencing miscarriages or dealing with the health complications that threaten a pregnancy. In Alabama, Oklahoma, and South Carolina, states where fetal personhood is enshrined in law, pregnant women faced more prosecutions. In fact, most prosecutions documented in the report did not actually involve abortion at all. Of the 200 cases, only one was prosecuted under a law specifically meant to criminalize abortion. The others involved statutes related to child abuse, neglect, or endangerment, which treat an embryo or a fetus as a person with legal rights that compete with those of the pregnant person. The report notes that prosecutors often don't need to prove that any actual harm occurred to the fetus. They merely have to demonstrate that a woman posed some risk to her own pregnancy. That includes the case of Amari Marsh, a 23-year-old South Carolina woman who miscarried in June of 2023. After miscarrying, she was arrested and charged with murder-homicide by child abuse. Marsh spent 22 days in jail before being placed under house arrest. She faced 20 years in prison. It was more than a year later that she was cleared by a grand jury and told that her case would not proceed to trial. And that's what happens when you criminalize abortion. You criminalize pregnant women. The state has a controlling stake in every pregnant woman's body, and every miscarriage is a potential prosecution. When Dobbs overturned the constitutional right to an abortion, conservatives claimed the issue was simply being returned to the states. You'll still hear Donald Trump use that line today. But it was never about the states. And anti-abortion Republicans have demonstrated that again and again since Roe was overturned, pushing for neighboring states to comply with abortion bans, surveilling women across state lines, and criminalizing the mailing of abortion medication. If the goalposts seem to have shifted since Dobbs, it's because the fight was never actually about states' rights. It's not even just about a nationwide abortion ban. The effort to grant fetuses more rights than the woman carrying them signals a much broader and much more dangerous objective. It is about control over women's bodies. With Roe gone, the report warns that criminalization of pregnant women will continue, especially after the election, when Republicans are less concerned over voter backlash. Just this month, Louisiana became the first state to categorize abortion pills as, quote, dangerous controlled substances, end quote, threatening jail time or fines for anyone possessing them without a prescription. According to Farah Diaz-Tello, senior counsel and legal director at the nonprofit If, When, How, quote, people are afraid to even seek information. Once a prosecutor decides that they want to punish someone for ending their pregnancy, they're going to find a way to do it. They're going to find a way that's going to fit, end quote. As long as a woman's reproductive health is tied to the U.S. criminal code, America is increasingly becoming a country where pregnancy automatically marks a woman suspect, and her womb effectively becomes state property. For more on this, I'm joined by Mary Ziegler, a law professor and historian at the University of California, Davis Law School. She's a leading authority on the legal history of the abortion debate in America. She's the author of multiple books, including Roe, The History of a National Obsession. Mary, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. I think it's important to understand here, we need to separate what people's views are about abortion from this concept of criminalizing pregnancy, from this concept that a woman or someone who can have a child, bear a child, will be subject to different laws than I will ever be for my entire life in America if we accept that you can criminalize pregnancy.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the things we've seen after Dobbs is that this quest for fetal personhood has really fueled these prosecutions, right? The idea is to say, well, we know, we as the anti-abortion movement know that the Supreme Court isn't ready to say that a fetus has constitutional rights. But what we're going to do is build the case prosecution by prosecution, law by law, to say, well, look, isn't it weird that the law doesn't give embryos and fetuses constitutional rights when we can prosecute all of these women and all of these pregnant people for what they've done? So in a way, we're seeing a lot of people's lives being treated as collateral damage in this fight for fetal personhood, and that's just going to accelerate, I think, over time.
Can you help me understand how the criminalization of pregnancy, and I'm using this term because the point is once you are pregnant, you are potentially subject to the state getting involved with your body, again, in a way that I will never be for any reproductive activity that I undertake. How does this reflect on the goals of the anti-abortion movement?
Well, I think it's all about setting a precedent, right? So we saw when the anti-abortion movement was attacking Roe v. Wade that it was really playing the long game, right? It was kind of chipping away at Roe over the course of decades before it went for that kind of fatal blow. And the same thing is happening with fetal personhood. Most people don't expect the U.S. Supreme Court to issue a decision on fetal personhood in the next year, right? So the idea is to find lots of other laws that treat fetuses and embryos as people, and even to use other laws that don't say anything about abortion, anything about fetuses, or anything about embryos, where those laws are used to treat fetuses and embryos as people. And then that's designed to kind of set precedent after precedent after precedent in the law in conservative states to build a case for fetal personhood before the U.S. Supreme Court down the road. Now, that might never work, right? But in the meantime, it's creating a lot of surveillance and a lot of criminalization and a lot of harm for pregnant people anyway. And I think that's the sort of devastating part of this. Even if we never get to a U.S. Supreme Court decision on fetal personhood, right, a lot of harm will have been done along the way.
So let's discuss some of that harm, the implications of thinking about, discussing, working toward fetal personhood laws, whether they happen or not, has an impact on women who are undergoing IVF or facing pregnancy complications or, as we mentioned, have miscarried. There are legal risks women face now, regardless of whether fetal personhood becomes federal statute.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things we've seen in this report and really in the aftermath of Dobbs is that those effects are reaching a larger and larger number of women, right? So historically, the Pregnancy Justice Report shows that the people the most likely to be criminalized for pregnancy or really affected by the fetal personhood fight in general are likely to be low-income people. But that's starting to change, right? So if you believe that you need to establish fetal personhood in law, and you believe that embryos are people, for example, you're going to try to restrict or criminalize IVF, and that's going to affect a whole different group of people. If you believe that miscarriages and stillbirths are potential homicides, that's going to affect any number of people who have miscarriages or stillbirths unrelated to things like substance use, which was the traditional sort of basis for prosecution. So it's a larger universe of people who've been affected, and that's going to continue, I think, as a trend.
Someone's going to tweet me and say that this case of Omari Marsh that I talked about is an outlier. Is it?
Well, I mean, in the sense that it's a homicide prosecution, we've seen more of a focus on these kind of child endangerment laws because those three states you mentioned, Alabama, Oklahoma, and South Carolina, have laws specifically authorizing this kind of prosecution. But one of the trends we're seeing is prosecutors reaching out for other laws that are not really about pregnancy to prosecute pregnant people, right? And so each case in a way is an outlier, but when you look at the big picture and you zoom out, we're seeing a trend of prosecutors looking for new ways to criminalize conduct related to pregnancy. And the Omari Marsh case is an example of that.
Mary, good to talk to you. Thank you. I always appreciate you being here. Mary Ziegler is a law professor and historian at the University of California, Davis, author of the book Roe, The History of a National Obsession.